So the problem is that they say that the device is not registered.
Oh.
Hey. Say that the device is no longer, there is no license.
Is this work?
Okay. This is working.
Yep.
No, I mean, like, there are so many places in it. It wasn't a nest.
Let's start. So good morning, everybody. Today we have Alex. He, let's say he's a non-member of the group. Joined us this year with the founding from the historian governments. And he's going to present his projects. And yeah, so the floor is yours. Normally we do 40 minutes maximum of seminars, ask questions.
Okay. Okay, so I've put a bunch of stuff. I don't know if someone can confirm online that from this distance my audio is fine, or if I need to do anything. So yeah, I put a bunch of stuff on the presentation to just provide a brief context about the project and my background, and then I focused on one specific aspect on the project that is around cooperative strategies. And then, yeah, I have a bunch of open questions in case you feel that anything like that resonates with your research or something that the lab is closer at, and so on. So, post-growth cooperative transformations. I'm gonna present a thing we have been developing for quite almost 10 years now. It's been around, but it's not been. It didn't make the news as much, let's put it like that. The open cooperative is one of the sorts of alternatives to the gig economy. Yeah, but first, a bit of context. I'm being asked often where I'm based and where I come from, and this is a complicated question, so I drew this map. So these are some of the places that I might find myself into. So I'm Greek. I'm from Thessaloniki. I also spend a substantial amount of my time there. I am affiliated with a little research group and local social organization called P2P Lab, which is based in Ioannina, that's on the northern western side of Greece. And this is also where a lot of the field work that I'm engaged is based. My formal affiliation is Tallinn University of Technology, that's all the way to the other side of Europe, in Estonia. And now I am doing, for this project, I am on a visiting researchship with the Post-Growth Innovation Lab, and also in collaboration with the Autonomous University of Barcelona. So Mario and Yorgos are kind of co-supervising this research project. And so I'm somewhere in between of all of those things, and there are multiple connections across the different places and institutions that are being involved in whichever way. So this is just some random logos around.
What is it?
This is the one above Ioannina is the Zoo Makers Community Makerspace. This is one of the flagship projects of the P2P Lab. So this is also one of the fields that I am very much embedded into. And yeah, other field communities include like COPLI 93 in Estonia. That's a community-driven cultural cultural hub and creative space. We're trying to create something like that in Thessaloniki and under the name of Kinon, which is common in Greek. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that create a confusing image and structure. So what I've been trying is, though, I created a website that provides a single brand to pull all of those things together and somehow make sense of it. So Life After Growth is basically kind of the umbrella branding under which I'm trying to squeeze all the different stuff that I am engaged with, but I don't necessarily run on my own because I'm part of a research group and a broader society and so on. So the Life After Growth started actually as the name of summer school 2 years ago, but it somehow developed to more than that. So this is also connected to the research project that currently funds me to be here and do this research, but it is not limited to that. So I'm going to focus on the research projects of exploring a climate resilient global economy and society. Some keywords from this research project is that Life After Growth aims to evolve to an open space for research, sharing, and experimentation around post-growth pathways of collective action and organizing. So this is kind of the overall aim of how we would envision this website to be kind of a portal to this open space. And more specifically, I cannot read that, but yeah, maybe I'll do it like this. Right. So, yeah, all right. Okay, so this research envisions to explore the conditions for a climate resilient global economy and society. And today I'm going to focus on this particular keyword. So what are those conditions? So a starting point has been, I've been engaged in a long time in research around the commons, lately also connecting that to degrowth and post-growth. But my focus is specifically political economy and economic organization. So one thing that has been baffling me is that, okay, we see that things are definitely not going well. If you look at the consumption on primary energy consumption by different sources, yeah, oil is not going anywhere, coal is not going anywhere, fossil fuels are not decreasing, they're actually increasing. So what's with that? There seems to be a structural problem that does not allow us to leave fossil fuels behind, which is one of the key things to transition towards a post-growth economic form of organizing and so on. So that's one of the things. And the second one is that the moment we speak about growth not being a given, everybody starts to panic on the economic sense. So we have, and you have this all sorts, we're not strangers to all sorts of articles and arguments on degrowth being the equivalent of recession and economic depression. And this is why it is triggering so much panic, and nobody is actually able to engage with that for what it actually is. So my starting assumptions is that to enable these conditions for post-growth transformation, again, the focus being political economic organization, we need to address these two dependencies that make the system very vulnerable. So fossil fuels and dependence on economic growth. And for that, the first step would be to examine these deep structures that are conditioning economic and social organizations. So what is it that makes everyone so fucking scared whenever degrowth is being mentioned in a room, or that, growth is definitely not happening forever? And what makes it so difficult to leave fossil fuels behind? So look at the different structural elements that keep us caged into this system. And in the meantime, also explore strategies for resilience and protection of lives and livelihoods. So this is a withdrawal kind of direction, that we leave some of the things behind, and that makes a lot of us vulnerable to in the midway. So in my research proposal, I came up with this term called transformative resilient practices, which can mean basically anything. But what I particularly wanted it to mean is that we're not just building resilience for resilience itself. We're not just making societies more immune to degradation and the things that are going to come. We're looking at these forms of resilience that have a transformative potential for the system as a whole. So tackling those two levels at the same time. So ensuring lives and livelihoods for the people that try different forms of organizing that are not dependent on fossil fuels, not dependent on economic growth, and this way increasing the amount of opportunities and options that we have to actually transcend this system. So one of these practices goes under the name of open cooperativism. So this has been an ongoing research for a long time now, but I find that it makes a lot of sense to connect it with post-growth strategies, and this is what I would like to bring on the table today. So we live into this phenomenon that I like to call the headless executive doing magic, also known as digital transformation. So that's a really nice experiment. You can look or anything about digital and you will find these suited men doing magic, but they don't have any heads, and that's so sad. So what's about the digital transformation? We have these aesthetics of, magical things happening and things becoming immaterial and all these kinds of narratives, but the situation is much different. It is much more material and much more embodied. And in particular, it affects human bodies in ways that it changes the way we approach work. So work is becoming more fragmented, more task-based. Multitasking is kind of a natural thing that is happening across many sectors right now. At the same time, this multitasking does not happen in a societal setting that people are actually thriving and trying different things. We're all forced to do all of these different things isolated in a little box, and we're being continuously monitored and assessed under the way, and we're doing this to other people as well. Now, I have been traveling a lot over the past month, and I've been getting like tons of messages for whatever service I have been used. How was your experience with your plane? How was your experience with the airport toilet? How was the experience of your experience with these emails and so on? So this continuous and relentless evaluation and assessing of everything, that ends up to having a very embodied and material manifestation. So it changes the conditions under which we work. And eventually, all of that is connected to is coupled with a complete dismantling of any social security structure. So it's basically this individualization on steroids, that it is up to you to create the secure conditions of your life, get as many stars you want, because if you fail, there's nothing to hold you back. And so on the background, we have another bunch of very material infrastructures that are controlling and optimizing this structure through algorithmic management, automation, and so on, that ends up being this invisible undercurrent that is kind of guiding the whole logic of the system. So the digital transformation can very much be seen as a process of digital precarization. So this is destroying the basically post-World War II social contract that, capitalism is going to do its thing, markets are going to distribute goods, and we'll have a state that will take care of some safety net so that nobody falls behind. This is no longer there. And the material conditions, the productive systematic features are also kind of crumbling because the whole political economy is changing rapidly. On the other hand, from our research, and when I say we, I mean the collective of people that I have been interacting through the research I've been engaged with, there's another side of the digital transformation that has also developed its own undercurrent, that of the digital commons, with projects like free and open source software, open hardware, open knowledge projects like Wikipedia, and you have less prominent projects like the Apache web server or WordPress and so on, that are open source projects that are very much hidden into the multiple layers of the web and internet-based communication. So a substantial degree of the backbone of what runs the digital transformation today is actually commons-based dynamics. And that is very interesting because on one hand, you have this normalization, but on the other hand, you have commons-based forms of production underpinning a very capitalist structure. So this is very ambiguous to look at. But what we were particularly interested in our research around the digital commons is how this duality has been navigating. So the digital commons practices and projects have developed this dual strategy that is simultaneously building resistance and creating resilience within capitalism. So you have open source software communities that are creating software that is then being exploited by Amazon, but they somehow, their community ethics and dynamics are not being affected by that at least not entirely. So they keep some organizational form that is community-based. They keep contributing to a resource that is a digital commons and is somehow protected from co-optation or complete takeover by the capitalist system. And so on one hand, they're building these forms of resistance, creating spheres that can be seen as something other than capital in this particular context, and through that, creating this post-capitalist imaginary. So they're operating within the system while creating imaginaries of something that could potentially transcend that. So how this is going to happen is a completely different story, but this is there and you can observe it. And what these post-capitalist imaginaries are based upon is the resurfacing of the idea of the commons and commoning as a practice. So this idea that human communities can self-organize around shared relations and resources, making sense of their own reality as something that is being co-produced and co-created and co-managed, and transcending different spheres of social provisioning based on this logic. I really like a particular quote by David Bollier saying that the commons is the sector of economy in life that generates value in ways that are often taken for granted. And I like this interpretation because it resurfaces the idea of the commons not only as these isolated, resilient social systems, socio-ecological systems that function in this way, but it sheds light on the different diverse spheres of our life today, in today's economy, in the way that we live, that are based on commoning relations that we take for granted. And these taken for granted practices can be seen in all of the different situations. So we have this transition on research around the commons that has seen a huge resurgence over the last 10 to 20 years, starting from, the traditional commons of common fisheries, technological systems, irrigation system, pasture lands, the typical Ostrom type of traditional commons research, looking at the institutions of self-management, how they can be sustained over time and so on. We have this kind of middle point with the digital commons of open knowledge, open source software, and open design. Am I the only one that can admit people? I would appreciate if somebody else could do that. Yeah. So we have this tunnel from these different commoning relationships becoming more prominent that has eventually, or at least that is my interpretation, shed light to a broad variety of commoning that is happening in society today that is much more relational. So understanding our own relations as a part of the commons. The space and time, like urban commons and commoning time and caring around common infrastructures and so on, affect emotions, the vibe that we have in workspaces or in communities and so on. And of course, care work, which also includes earth care. So the things that are taken for granted that are absolutely essential for the system to reproduce itself. And so open co-ops are an exploratory concept seeking a synthesis between the traditional and historical practices of the cooperative movement and solidarity economy that initially, if we go back to the industrial transition, emerged as ways to exactly address the same or similar types of precariousness that were happening from the exploitation, expropriation, dispossession, enclosures of the commons of the time, with the new forms of resistance and collective reimagination brought from commoning. So what would be a potential synthesis of the two? And with this, I'm going to present two particular examples that might shed light to a potential synthesis that could open up new questions for the discussion. One of the first cases we have examined a long way ago was there's a network of social enterprises in Wellington, New Zealand. It's called Spiral. I really like the motto, more people working on stuff that matters, which as a proposition, I very much endorse. So that would be nice to have more people to work on stuff that matters. So intuitively, we were drawn into this research, but their history is actually even more interesting. So it started back in 2010. Some guy had an existential despair. He was this freelance software developer making good money by having independent contracts and stuff, but he felt that this wasn't good enough for his life, and he wanted to share more time with people that he liked working with and maybe do something meaningful for the community. And so he found a bunch of other people, more professionals, from lawyers to consultants to business and finance experts and so on, and said, okay, what if we spend half of our time doing the research that is actually being paid for, and we make enough money so that we spend the rest of our time doing things for the community and trying to develop an alternative ecosystem. this kind of grouping and team building ended up creating, so they ended up creating an organization, they called it Inspiral, and then this pattern reproduced itself in other smaller teams. So, you get one professional working on a specific thing, and soon you get other people trying to contribute more of their time into these common projects. And these little teams started to become social enterprises. So there has been a lot of evolution. So they have the so-called Inspiral ventures have been going on and off. This is kind of a fluid and flexible system that they create different vehicles to concentrate this type of labor and contribution. This is, I had to actually check it, what are the ventures today? So the most famous one is probably Lumio. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a collaborative decision-making platform. It has also been the basis for platforms like Decidi in Barcelona and so on. So this was initially formulated to facilitate NGOs and social enterprises to take democratic decisions together in a better UX interface and so on. But it is now being adapted to different from corporations to public sector organizations and so on. Then there is Greater Than, which is a collective focusing on training and consulting services for reorganizing businesses and enterprises. So they're doing all sorts of leadership seminars from big NGOs all the way to small enterprises, to business collectives, to cooperatives or whatever. So they just looking at the patterns of organization, how this can happen in a more Inspiral-like way, because they also emerged through this community. Bamboo is a design studio trying to create more meaningful user-centered experiences, working that is also adapted to the needs of social enterprises and this network. One of the oldest ventures, the Development Academy. So this is a development academy that is focusing on the types of skills that are necessary for the social economy, and then impact and admin stuff for social enterprises, which we know is kind of the heart of the beast over there. So you see that this is a cooperative ecosystem that is built around the needs of the social economy. So trying to support the resilience and sustainability and development of this field of the economy. Internally, they also use similar structures because they have this nonprofit foundation that's kind of in the middle. It has a cooperative statute, even though it is not legally as a cooperative. They have formulated the statute in following the cooperative principles, the one share, one vote kind of thing, non-redeemable shares and so on, non-transferable, and they have a rotating management board and all sorts of conditions around that. What they also do is, what I find really interesting is that they recognize different forms of contribution from the ventures and the different flexible teams to the foundation. So they have voluntary agreements between the different ventures according to the level of maturity, how much revenue they can create and so on, and what they bring back into the foundation to maintain the common infrastructures and so on. For instance, Lumio is probably the best example, because other than actually contributing a percentage of the revenue, they're also bringing Lumio for the foundation, which serves as the decision-making platform. But there are other types of contribution that are also recognized that are not restricted into monetary contributions. On the back end, what Inspiral Ventures basically provide is that it's not restricted to the membership of the enterprises themselves. There's a broader network of people that can go in and out of the different ventures, trying to diminish the administrative and transaction costs around that. So for instance, they have, this used to be the modus operandi of Inspiral services that is now kind of diffused into the different ventures. So that was one of the first ventures. Basically, if you're someone in the Inspiral network, it doesn't matter if you're a member of the foundation or of any of the ventures or whatever. You can offer your services for a client or social enterprise that might need them. And there is this interface in the middle that facilitates these transactions. So there's an invoice being issued by one of the ventures, the most relevant one. You're connected to some virtual account with this venture. There's a distribution event that is going to the collaborative budget to maintaining the foundation and so on, and the different things being taken care of.
What is a distribution event?
Come again?
A distribution event?
Yeah, so money gets in and money gets out, basically. So it's basically separating the legal structures that need to engage in the formal transaction and the informal level of how people are working in a more network-like and community-driven way into the network, which is something we're going to see a bit more in the second case again. And Co-Budget is a platform. So this is Lumio that they use for decision-making across all of these types of collaborations that they engage with. And they also have Co-Budget, which is another piece of software that they use to reinvest all of these surplus money that they get cut out of the different transactions and the different ventures. And so there are different procedures to suggest different projects or support existing ones and so on. They collaboratively decide what to do. And then this is basically how the system has evolved through time, from the ventures that existed to the ones that are right now, to people living and doing something different. And they keeping this collective reinvestment of their wealth into new things. A second example, going back to Europe. So that's a commons creative cooperative called SMART. SMART is an acronym going for Société Mutuelle pour Artistes. Someone could basically probably butcher this French name less than I have. So SMART is a model of cooperation that has found different applications in different countries across Europe. I'm going to focus on the Belgian chapter, which is the most developed one and the one that started it all. So, it has these nice offices in Brussels, a co-working space, a coffee place, and so on. So it also has a physical presence that is much more prominent. Flexing some numbers from the latest report. So this is kind of a cooperative that includes more than 90,000 professionals and their economic activities, generating like 2 billion turnover. It's the second largest employer in Belgium after Brussels Airlines. So that's quite impressive. Turnover, of course, you have the growth dynamics and this kind of stuff, which is interesting for what it is. Okay, so it is growing, it's creating more revenue. It is employing a lot of people. What are these members doing? So 48% of the membership are active in the arts and cultural sector, which is how it actually initiated, addressing these kinds of professional activities that are particularly precarious already before the digital economy, and then getting on steroids with the whole thing. And then it started having increasing membership from all sorts of professionals that were getting into this gig type of economy, from educators to event planners, gardeners, well-being life coaches or whatever, journalists, video games, delivery people, and so on. And how those people are. So the structure of the cooperative itself is kind of complicated. And on the center of it, I think, is the more virtual space so it's a digital space of virtual enterprises within which the different members channel their activities. And this is connected to different legal structures. So they have a co-op, which is the original social co-op that was created. Then there are two associations that are fulfilling different purposes, from employing people to issuing invoices. So they're using different vehicles according to the needs. And of course, they have a non-profit foundation to maintain, the custodian of the system and so on. So this is whatever I'm going to refer from now on can mean mobilizing either one or several of these legal structures as a whole. So there are different ways, and pardon my French here because I haven't translated that. There are different ways that these members are being employed. So there are people that are having an employment contract, that are working on specific service delivery and so on. There are other people that are connected through a how can you say, the user contract or whatever, that they access the system, which in this system they just create virtual enterprises. So these into the shared enterprise, as they say. So these people have an entrepreneurial status without being registered as self-employed. So they're using the employment status of the of normal employment, and they undertake their autonomous activities within this digital space. So this kind of reduces the transaction costs and so on. And finally, there are members that are doing all of that and are also members of the cooperative. So they vote for the strategy and so on. So that's a highest level of engagement. So how it works is that you have this shared enterprise space, what they call the shared enterprise. So people access that through a set of digital tools that they can use to manage their business stuff. And through this, they're connected to clients. So up to the last statistics I've checked, there are more than 20,000 production units that offer all sorts of services, from arts and creative outputs to education to translation to you name it. The common online platform is used to issue invoices, to make arrangements and contracts with the clients and so on, and it's connected to a bunch of clients. So basically they access this user space. So this is an online, basically ERP system. So it has all sorts of functions with accounting, with business strategy, different tools that they can use for their invoices and contracts and so on, different templates at their disposal. And they have an exhaustive user manual on how to use that, in which they also explain their model. So I got most of the information through that before I actually get into doing interviews. So this is openly accessible, provided you know French. So Google Translate was good enough. And so, yeah, this is a more practical level of how this operates. So you have, this little guy there that is offering some sort of service, and you have a client. You have the connection and the negotiation happening as it would have otherwise. You agree on the terms of how you're going to provide the service. And then through the system, they can create a quote, a contract, the different paperwork that they need. And this is basically connected to the overall infrastructure. So one of these enterprises or the legal structures that are being mobilized. And there is a 6.5% contribution that is automatically from any contract that is getting into the common infrastructures. So you have an invoice issued by one of these structures, the client pays, 6.5% is being withheld, and then there is part of that is being automatically distributed to social security, taxes, and so on, because they have an employment status. And then the rest of that goes to the is paid as a salary to the person providing the service. So it's, again, this differentiation between the formal arrangements and the way that people can work to provide services and so on. And this can also apply that people that are getting employed into some of these virtual enterprises can also move flexibly from one to the other without having to do new contracts and new arrangements anytime. They just negotiate stuff between them and so on. So out of these 195 millions that was a turnover of 2023, more than 85, so close to 86% went to the people running the production units. And this can either be translated into, earnings for them, maybe salaries for people that work with them. You have all sorts of transaction costs and so on. And there is a 14% that was committed into the shared company to maintain the infrastructure as a whole, the digital tools, the common infrastructure, and so on. So, trying to conclude a bit, I like to use I wanted to use the word vulnerability because it sounds cool, but I started this as with a reference to, any discussion about degrowth and post-growth is automatically shaking up the foundations of the system, right? It makes it very vulnerable, and not only the system, there are also the people that live and make a living out of that. So how do we tackle that? That, post-growth imaginaries do not lead to increasing vulnerability, or maybe vulnerability is a concept that can be seen in different ways. So as far as the as capitalism is concerned, and most importantly, the digital variation of that, vulnerability is something that you basically pay people to manage, right? So you have these vulnerabilities of the system, you need to do the assessment, risk assessment, and then make different strategies to push it out of the way. So what gets managed, what gets measured gets managed, the typical thing. This is something that needs to be ruled out of the system and being taken under control. And I may be oversimplifying, but this can also be very much similar to the way that climate vulnerability is being addressed to things like the IPCC reports on impacts. You know, in looking at the different regions, how vulnerable they are to climatic events, what are the mitigation strategies, what resources we need to mobilize, and so on. My inspiration came from a 2022 article speaking about commoning vulnerability that suggested a different way to understand vulnerability, not as a bug of the system, but very much as a basic condition of human life in common. So as a starting point from that, we must begin to rebuild life and support. So human beings are very much vulnerable. You know, the typical thing, we don't have fur and claws and stuff. If we get into the forest, we'll probably die. So what we have is we use this vulnerability to create social relations and societies and try to thrive into them. So into this shitstorm of different things that make us vulnerable, we maybe need to open ourselves to new ways of being affected by others before we're being affected from the consequences of the system, and understanding mutual vulnerability and affectability as a strength rather than as a liability, as the basis of our lives in common. So this is a really nice short text by Manuela Zechner, published at the Berliner Gazette back in 2022. So how can open co-ops help us reimagine vulnerability and build upon it in this way? So I have noted 6 strategies. Number 1, this idea of radical abundance. So taking as a starting point that economic production is not based on a scarcity of resources, of people and ideas and communication, but there are natural limits, of course, that maintain it. But instead of taking this artificial scarcity and planned obsolescence that is the norm of the economic system today, get it in reverse. So begin with ideas and knowledge and practices and relations being in abundance, and try to minimize our impact into the physical and socio-ecological systems and so on. And they do that through this, the different forms of commoning that they enable, from the digital tools that they share, from the entrepreneurial structures and the administrative structures that they share, like in the process of SMART, to money itself in co-budget, like in Spiral and so on. The recognition of diverse contributions, so opening up the sphere of what is a meaningful level of participation and what are different degrees of that into a collective system, and how we can recognize all of the things that we take for granted, back in the David Bollier quote. So, but this also coupled with reciprocal distribution. So we have this system that is operating in different ways. How can we also protect it from co-optation? So how can we protect this relationship from being taken over? How can we protect our digital tools from not being becoming tools of oppression and so on? Open organizational design, so there's transparency on how money and people are moved around, on how organization is made. I showed you before this, you know, the rules of the user manual of SMART is basically openly available for anyone to read, and Spiral has a very comprehensive handbook of how they organized, including their history and stuff. They're blogging all along of all their personal and most intimate stories of what happens into the community. So there's this open organizational design as a default, so that other people may benefit from that, rather than protecting that as intellectual property. So also connecting to the radical abundance idea. Reduced waste in the sense of reducing the impact on people and planet from practices that are driven from profit maximization. So they don't need to use additional resources to protect their intellectual property. They don't need to hide production processes from other people because they basically need to optimize them according to what makes sense for the community. And finally, they maintain this mutual infrastructure. So trying to, is connected to waste reduction. So they're all based into common spaces that are made optimized to the needs of what they need to produce. And so I'm going to leave you with an inspirational quote for the knowing of this world and the making of new worlds. This is a drawing by one of the summer school participants 2 years ago that I have exploited as much as I could because it's really nice, with reference, of course. And then some open question is, does this open cooperative thing make any sense? Are there any other cases that you're working on or you're part with that exhibit similar patterns that could be made sense in a different way? Maybe other transformative practices that work into this direction of increasing resilience of people and livelihood, and but simultaneously transcending the system as a whole, or at least creating the conditions for that. What is the thing with vulnerabilities? How can we comment them, or actively also thinking internally as a research lab, as academia, as community of scholars around degrowth, post-growth, and so on, and within the broader society? And yeah, any other visions of life after growth that you would like to share? That's all for me. I can stop sharing.
Okay, questions? Comments?